When I asked my wife what she wanted for her birthday, she didn't even look up from her phone. She just smirked and said, "You disappear." Then she kept scrolling like she'd asked for flowers or dinner reservations, and I sat there realizing the cruelest truths in a marriage usually show up disguised as jokes. My name's Ryan. I'm 38, I work in structural steel estimating outside Denver, and until that night, I still believed my marriage was going through some rough season that could be fixed if I stayed patient enough not to make it worse. That's the thing men like me do when the woman we love starts going cold. We explain it away. We call it stress, burnout, hormones, life. We tell ourselves long marriages go flat sometimes. That not every silence means danger. That not every dry spell means betrayal. We keep showing up. Keep paying bills. Keep fixing things around the house. Keep being steady because steady used to mean something. For a long time, I thought it still did. My wife's name was Lauren. We'd been married 7 years, together for almost 10. No kids. Just the two of us in a clean little house with a narrow backyard, a kitchen she insisted needed remodeling, and a marriage that from the outside still looked perfectly normal. We had careers, routines, dinner plans with friends every few weeks, shared streaming passwords, matching coffee mugs from a trip to Sedona, all the furniture of a stable life. What we didn't have anymore was warmth. That had been slipping for a while. Not all at once. That would have been easier to face. It came in pieces. Lauren stopped kissing me hello when I got home. Then she stopped touching me casually in passing. No hand on my shoulder in the kitchen. No leaning against me on the couch. No reaching for me in bed like my body still felt familiar and safe to hers. She still talked to me, but mostly in the language of management. Did I pay the gas bill? Could I grab paper towels? Her car needed new tires soon. Her sister might come by Sunday. There was always something practical to discuss, some task to assign, some small domestic detail to keep us sounding like a functioning unit. That was how the marriage started dying, I think. Not with screaming. With administration. Lauren worked in interior design, mostly high-end residential projects. Clients with too much money and too many opinions. Her days were full of fabric samples, contractors, revisions, and the kind of fake polite communication that leaves a person drained by the time they get home. At least that was the explanation I gave myself for a long time. She's stressed. She has difficult clients. She's exhausted. Don't make it about you. Don't be needy. Don't become one more thing she has to manage. So I made myself smaller. I cooked more. Cleaned more. Tried not to ask why she could come alive for a dinner party or a client event but act like basic conversation with me was something she had to squeeze in between notifications. I told myself love changes shape. I told myself marriage doesn't always feel romantic. I told myself mature people don't panic every time affection dips. But there's a difference between love changing shape and love withdrawing from the room. Lauren was withdrawing. The bedroom made that obvious first. I'm not going to dress it up more than it deserves. We had stopped being husband and wife in any real physical way months before the birthday comment. It wasn't a dramatic dead bedroom where every rejection became an argument. That almost would have been easier. No, with Lauren it turned clinical. Efficient. She was tired. She had a headache. She had an early day. She didn't feel good. I'd reach for her and she'd shift just enough to make me remove my own hands so she didn't have to. That's a particular kind of humiliation, by the way. When your wife gets so practiced at avoiding you that she doesn't even need to say no anymore. Your body learns it for her. I brought it up twice. Once gently in the kitchen on a Sunday morning when the house was quiet and I still thought timing mattered. I told her I missed us. She said I was making things heavier than they needed to be. The second time was after a work dinner where she came home bright and laughing and full of energy I had not seen directed at me in months. I asked her, calmly, why strangers and clients seemed to get the best version of her while I got whatever was left. She looked at me like I had interrupted a better thought and asked if I was seriously starting something at midnight. After that, I stopped asking. Not because I stopped feeling it. Because there's only so many times a man can hand his wife the truth about how lonely he feels before he realizes she sees it as emotional clutter. Still, I kept trying in smaller ways. I'd bring home the coffee she liked from that expensive place near her studio. I'd suggest dinner out. I'd offer weekend plans. A hike. A drive. A movie. Anything that didn't feel like two tenants sharing overhead. Most of it got delayed, declined, or reduced to maybe next week. Next week never showed up. And then came her birthday. It was a Wednesday that year. Mid-October. The weather had just started turning cold enough in the evenings to make the house feel hollow if one person was already emotionally somewhere else. I got home a little earlier than usual because one of my afternoon meetings cancelled, and I remember thinking maybe that was a good thing. Maybe I could catch her in a softer mood. Maybe I could ask what she wanted for her birthday and use that as a way back into something warmer than bills and grocery lists. She was at the kitchen table when I walked in. Phone in one hand. Glass of white wine near her elbow. Shoes off. Still in work clothes, but slouched in that tired, detached way she'd started wearing around the house like I was part of the furniture. She didn't look up right away when I came in. Just gave me this absent little hey like I was an expected interruption. I set my keys down, poured myself water, and asked how her day went. She said busy. That was it. Busy. No follow-up. No story. No return question. I stood there for a second, then sat across from her and asked the question anyway. I said her birthday was next week and asked what she wanted this year. She didn't laugh. That's the part that matters. People always imagine cruel lines arrive with drama around them. They don't. The worst ones come softly, casually, with just enough plausible deniability to make you feel stupid for reacting. Lauren kept her eyes on the screen, smirked just slightly, and said, "You disappear." Just like that. Then she took another sip of wine and kept scrolling. I remember every stupid detail of the moment. The hum of the refrigerator. The yellow under-cabinet lights. The ring of condensation under her glass. The fact that she didn't look at me even after she said it, like somewhere in her mind she had already decided I didn't deserve a face-to-face delivery for that kind of contempt. I sat there and waited for the correction. The follow-up. The little smile and "I'm kidding." It never came. Instead, after a few seconds, she glanced up and said, "God, don't be sensitive. It was a joke." But by then it was too late. Because whatever she called it after the fact, the first version had already landed in my chest exactly the way she meant it to. Not as humor. As truth spoken recklessly by someone too comfortable being cruel to hide it well. I nodded once and stood up. She asked where I was going in that irritated tone she used whenever my reaction threatened to make her own behavior feel real. I told her I was going to shower. She said, "Seriously?" Like I was ruining the evening by not laughing along. I didn't answer. That shower was the first place in a long time I let myself think clearly. Not emotionally. Clearly. Because the comment didn't create the problem. It named it. For months, maybe longer, I had been moving through my marriage like a man trying to earn back warmth from someone already spending it elsewhere, even if I didn't know where elsewhere was yet. I kept chasing repair because that felt noble. Patient. Husbandly. But her birthday line did something strange to me. It took all that effort and made it look pathetic in the harshest light possible. "You disappear." That wasn't irritation. That wasn't a bad joke. That was a wish. And once I understood that, I stopped thinking about how to win my wife back. I started thinking about why she seemed so sure she could afford to lose me. The next morning, nothing looked different. That was the part that got me first. Lauren came into the kitchen in one of her oversized sweaters, hair pinned up loosely, coffee mug in hand, and moved through the room like the night before had been ordinary. She asked if I had seen her measuring tape. Then she reminded me her client call might run late Thursday, so dinner would be on me if I got home first. No apology. No softness. No awkwardness. Just logistics. I stood there by the toaster, listening to my wife assign me dinner duty less than 12 hours after telling me she wanted me to disappear, and something in me stayed oddly calm. Not healed. Not numb. Just calm in a way I hadn't been for months. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't hoping the next sentence out of her mouth would fix something. I was watching her. That changed everything. Before that night, every interaction between us still carried some part of me trying to get back to normal. I looked for clues she was in a better mood. I'd test whether a joke might land. I'd offer something small, dinner out, coffee, a drive on Sunday, hoping one of those gestures might crack the wall open enough for her to step back through. After the birthday comment, I stopped offering. I didn't announce it. Didn't turn cold on purpose. I just stopped reaching. And the weird thing was, Lauren barely seemed to notice. That hurt worse than if she'd asked why I was being distant. Because it meant my effort had been doing all the emotional labor of the marriage for longer than I realized. Once I removed it, the silence didn't suddenly become noticeable to her. It just became quieter for me. That week, I started paying attention the way men do when hope steps aside and pride finally wakes up. I noticed how rarely she looked directly at me when we talked unless the subject involved money, schedules, or something around the house that needed handling. I noticed how easily she could stay animated on work calls from her home office, laughing with clients, sounding warm and sharp and alive, then come into the kitchen afterward and answer me with one-word replies like conversation itself had become too expensive to waste on her husband. I also noticed how often her phone was suddenly part of her hand. Not always. That would have been too obvious. Lauren wasn't reckless. She was careful in the way people are careful when they think they're still smarter than the person watching them. Her phone started showing up in places it never used to. Bathroom counter while she showered. Tucked under a magazine in the living room, but always within reach. Face down on the kitchen table. Carried into the laundry room. Slipped into her robe pocket at night. All subtle enough to deny. All clear enough to feel. The next Friday, 2 days before her birthday, we had dinner with friends at a wine bar downtown. Same circle we'd known for years. Talia and Ben. Marcus and Jenna. People who had seen enough of our marriage to think they understood it, but not enough to know how cold it had gotten in the rooms without witnesses. Lauren was different the second we got there. Lighter. Not affectionate with me. Just socially alive in a way I hadn't seen at home in months. She laughed faster. Talked more. Touched people when she told stories. Rested a hand on Jenna's arm at one point while making some joke about a nightmare client who wanted 6 shades of beige to feel emotionally distinct. The table laughed. I laughed too, because that was still automatic then. But mostly I sat there and watched this version of my wife move through the room like nothing was wrong with her capacity for warmth. It just wasn't being spent on me. About halfway through the second round of drinks, Marcus asked if Lauren had any birthday plans. Nothing loaded. Just normal table conversation. Before I could answer, Lauren smiled into her glass and said she was hoping for a quiet year. Fewer obligations. Less pretending. That word caught in my head immediately. Pretending. Ben laughed and asked what exactly she was pretending through. Lauren shrugged and said adulthood mostly. Work. Social stuff. Expectations. Then she took a sip and added, marriage can feel like a full-time performance too, if we're being honest. The table got that strange little hush people fall into when someone says something just sharp enough to sound true and just vague enough to stay socially legal. Jenna jumped in and tried to smooth it over with some joke about all marriages being weird and private. Everyone laughed again. The moment moved on. But I didn't. Because Lauren didn't sound drunk. She sounded relieved. Like every small public jab was a way of letting some private contempt breathe a little. On the drive home, I didn't ask what she meant. I just let the silence sit. That seemed to bother her more than questions would have. After a few minutes, she asked if I was really going to do this. I asked, do what? She looked out the window and said the quiet thing. The sulking thing. The act where I make her feel like the villain because I can't take an offhand comment. There it was again. That trick. Not just dismissing the wound. Punishing me for feeling it. I told her I wasn't sulking. I was listening. She laughed once, short and dry, and said that was exactly the problem lately, that I listened to everything like I was building a case instead of living a life. That sentence sat with me all weekend. Because she was right about one part. I was building a case now. Not against her in some legal sense. Against my own denial. By Sunday afternoon, I had started noticing small inconsistencies that used to slip past me when I was busy trying to be patient. Lauren had become vague about work in a way she never used to be. She still talked about clients, but less specifically. More references to a meeting or a vendor or a guy from the install side without names attached. She had also started dressing more carefully for things she claimed were routine. Not glamorous. Just deliberate. Better shoes for a supplier walkthrough. A little more makeup for a casual Friday. A blouse I hadn't seen in months for a so-called site visit that somehow ran past 8. Alone, any of that meant nothing. Together, it started to feel like the edges of something. Tuesday night, the week of her birthday, I got home around 7 and found her in the kitchen plating takeout onto actual dishes. She only did that when she wanted the evening to look more normal than it was. The table was set. Candles lit. Her wine poured already. For one brief second, a stupid part of me thought maybe she felt bad. Maybe this was some sideways attempt at repair. Maybe she had replayed the "you disappear" line in her head and realized how ugly it sounded once it wasn't protected by the word joke. Then dinner started. She spent most of it on her phone. Not constantly. Just enough. A glance here. A quick reply there. One smile she caught and killed too late when I looked up from my plate. I asked if work was blowing up again. She said not really, just some last-minute confusion on a materials order. I nodded and kept eating. A minute later, her phone buzzed again beside her glass. She didn't pick it up immediately, which was new. She waited, like she was trying to seem normal. Then she reached for it, checked the screen, and this tiny change came over her face. A softness. Private. Familiar in its shape even if I hadn't seen it aimed at me in a long time. I didn't say anything. She typed back under the table. That image stayed with me all night. Not because of jealousy. Because of the contrast. My wife had spent weeks speaking to me like I was an unpaid utility. Yet one text message could still pull warmth out of her body fast enough to change her whole expression. Later that night, in bed, I turned onto my side and said her name. Just her name. No accusation. No plea. She answered with a tired what from the dark. I asked if she was happy. Not with me. Just happy. There was a long pause. Then she said she didn't have the energy for another heavy conversation and turned toward the nightstand where her phone was charging. That was when I knew patience was over. Not because I had proof of anything yet. Because whatever was happening in my marriage, my wife was no longer trying to hide her contempt well enough for me to confuse it with stress. And once you stop chasing affection, you start noticing where it's really going. After that night, I stopped trying to read Lauren emotionally and started reading her behavior. That was the real shift. Before, every conversation had still carried some part of me hoping for repair. Even when she was cold, even when she was dismissive, even when she turned my hurt into inconvenience, there was still some stupid loyal part of me trying to understand her back into loving me better. Once that died, I got quieter and sharper at the same time. I started noticing timing. Lauren checked her phone most heavily in 3 windows, late morning, right around 5 in the afternoon, and after 10:30 at night. She was never obvious about it. That was part of what made it feel worse. She had gotten good at casual secrecy. A glance while stirring pasta. A quick reply while pretending to look at a client email. A smile cut short the second I walked into the room. It was all small enough to deny and precise enough to form a pattern. I also started noticing that her mood no longer followed our life. It followed something else. She could wake up clipped and distant, barely acknowledge me over coffee, then come back from a site visit in a lighter mood than I had seen in weeks. Or she could spend an entire Sunday answering me like I was background noise, then smile down at her phone at 10:47 p.m. like the day had finally brought her something worth feeling. At first I told myself that if there was something there, I still didn't know what kind of thing it was. Emotional affair. Work crush. Somebody feeding her ego. Maybe she just liked attention more than she realized. Maybe it hadn't crossed into anything I could point at without sounding paranoid. That was the problem with situations like this. The truth usually becomes visible in pieces, and every piece on its own looks too small to justify the weight of what it's doing to you. So I kept watching. The first real crack came 2 days before her birthday. It was Monday afternoon. I had come home early because one of my client meetings got moved, and when I walked in, Lauren was in the living room on her laptop. She didn't hear me at first. I stood in the entryway long enough to catch the shape of the moment before she rearranged it. She was smiling at the screen. Not politely. Not professionally. A real smile. Relaxed shoulders. Warm face. The version of her that used to live with me. Then she heard the door shut. The smile vanished so fast it made my chest tighten. She closed the laptop halfway and asked why I was home early in that flat, mildly irritated tone she used whenever reality interrupted whatever private current she was floating in. I told her the meeting moved. She nodded, said she was just finishing some notes, and angled the screen away from me as she stood up. That part mattered. Not because spouses need full access to each other's devices every second. Because Lauren had stopped behaving like she had nothing to hide. Later that evening, while we were eating takeout at the kitchen island, her phone lit up beside her water glass. She turned it face down before even reading it. Pure reflex. That alone told me enough to stop pretending I was imagining the shift. I asked if work was still on fire. She said no, just a vendor question. I said, this late? She said deadlines don't care what time it is. Then she smiled to herself. Tiny. Private. Immediate. That smile did more damage than if I had seen a flirty message right then. Because it told me this wasn't just stress. Stress doesn't brighten a woman from the inside. It drains her. Whatever she was hiding, it was energizing her in a way I had not been allowed to do in months. The next day, on her birthday, I didn't make a big production out of anything. That was intentional. I got her flowers. Left a card on the counter. Took her to dinner at the place she liked near Cherry Creek, the one I had originally pictured when I asked what she wanted for her birthday before she told me to disappear. The whole night felt like performing stability on a cracked stage. She was polite. That was the word for it. Polite with me. Warm with the waiter. Warm when she texted someone back in the bathroom and came out with that softened face she thought I wasn't sharp enough to recognize. I didn't mention it. I just let the night happen. When we got home, she said she was tired and went upstairs early. I stayed in the kitchen with a whiskey I didn't want, staring at the birthday card envelope in the trash. She had opened it, read it, said thank you, and set it aside like I had handed her a receipt she needed to file. That was the night I decided I needed more than instincts. The next morning, after she left for a client appointment, I sat in my truck outside the office for 10 minutes thinking about whether I was really about to become the husband who checked records and timelines. I hated that I even had to ask myself. But pride starts looking childish when somebody is already rearranging your life behind your back. So I opened our shared phone account. Not her messages. I didn't have those. Just call logs, timestamps, numbers. Patterns. One number showed up far more than the others. Not under a name, obviously. Just digits. But it was frequent in a way none of her other contacts were. Midday calls. Late afternoon calls. One 11-minute call at 10:38 p.m. the previous Thursday. Another at 11:02 p.m. the Sunday before that. 3 short calls on a Wednesday she had told me was wall-to-wall client chaos with no time to breathe. I copied the number into my notes app and stared at it. There's something surreal about seeing betrayal reduced to a list of timestamps. It looks so clinical. So harmless. But when those calls line up perfectly with the hours your wife goes emotionally dark with you and suddenly alive somewhere else, the digits stop being neutral. They start sounding like footsteps in your own house. I didn't call the number. Not yet. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But if some man picked up and heard a husband's silence on the line, the whole thing would collapse into warning signals before I had enough to hold on to. I needed him named before I needed him confronted. That break came on Friday. Lauren had a design review downtown and said she'd probably be late because the clients were indecisive and the contractor was one of those men who thinks confidence counts as competence. She said it with that dry little laugh she used when she wanted me to think I was still included in her inner commentary. I told her okay. Then around 6:30, while I was reheating leftovers, her iPad lit up on the side table in the den. She had left it there charging. That alone was unusual enough that I stopped moving. The notification preview only flashed for a second, but I saw enough. No full name. Just a first name. Ethan, still thinking about what you said in the car. My whole body went still. Not because the name itself meant anything yet. Because of the sentence. In the car. Thinking about what you said. That was not a vendor. Not a client. Not some harmless work thread bleeding into the evening. That was personal history in motion. Recent enough to still be warm. I walked over, looked at the screen, and watched the notification disappear. Then I did something I had avoided for weeks. I opened the device. It wasn't locked. Maybe she trusted the pattern too much by then. Maybe she thought I'd still be noble enough to stay blind. Maybe she simply forgot. Whatever the reason, the moment was there, and I took it. The message thread with Ethan wasn't long. That told me she had been deleting. But not cleanly enough. A few pieces remained. Her, you make this harder than it needs to be. Him, you're the one who keeps looking at me like that. Her, maybe because you keep giving me reasons. Then the one I had already seen. Still thinking about what you said in the car. There was more missing than visible, and somehow that made it feel worse. Not because the gaps protected her. Because the gaps proved intent. She knew enough to wipe. She just hadn't been perfect. I scrolled up farther and found nothing older. Deleted. I set the iPad down exactly where it had been and stood there in the den listening to my own pulse hammer in my ears. Ethan. The calls. The mood shifts. The guarded phone. The soft face. The work that kept following her into late nights and early mornings. And now a car conversation intimate enough to linger in his mind afterward. I didn't confront her when she got home. That was the hardest part of the whole night. She came in around 8, dropped her bag by the door, and launched straight into some story about a contractor delaying measurements because custom fixtures were behind schedule. Her tone was irritated in that controlled, competent way I'd spent years admiring and recent months resenting. She was handing me the cover story in real time, and I stood there by the stove looking at my wife and realizing she had been living in 2 narratives at once for longer than I knew. I just nodded. Asked if she wanted her leftovers plated or in the container. She said plated. Like we were normal. Like I hadn't just seen the first name of a man who had somehow become more emotionally alive in her day than I was in my own marriage. That night in bed, she turned away from me as usual. But I didn't lie there hurting the way I had before. I lay there listening. Not to her breathing. To the silence between her phone vibrations. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't trying to figure out whether my wife was becoming someone else. I was trying to figure out how long she had already been choosing him while still coming home to me. I didn't confront Lauren that night. That probably sounds strange after everything I had seen. The message. The call patterns. The little private smile every time that phone lit up. But by then, I understood something that took me too long to learn in that marriage. If I came at her with half-proof and raw emotion, she'd do what she always did. Minimize. Deflect. Turn my reaction into the problem. She had been rehearsing that move for months. So I stayed quiet. And I waited. The next break came 3 days later. It was Monday, late afternoon. I had to meet a fabricator on the west side, and the meeting wrapped faster than expected. On the drive back, I passed right by the mixed-use development where Lauren's design firm rented studio space on the second floor. I wasn't planning to stop. Not at first. But as I hit the light at the corner, I saw her car pulling out of the garage. I don't know what made me follow her in that moment. Maybe instinct. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe I was finally more afraid of staying confused than I was of finding out the rest. So I stayed 2 cars back. She didn't head toward home. She didn't head toward a client neighborhood either. She drove downtown, through the business district, then cut over toward a quieter street lined with restaurants and boutique hotels. Not the part of town you go to for tile samples or contractor walkthroughs. More the part you go when the workday is over and you want to be seen somewhere that feels a little removed from your real life. She pulled into the side lot behind a small hotel bar called the Hartwell. I kept driving past, parked on the next block, and walked back. The bar had tall front windows with half-drawn linen shades. Enough privacy to feel tucked away. Enough visibility for a husband standing outside to lose the last of his excuses in under 10 seconds. Lauren was already inside. And she wasn't alone. He was sitting across from her in a navy button-down with his sleeves rolled up, one arm draped casually along the back of the booth. Mid-30s maybe. Clean cut. The kind of face that would have blended into any room if I hadn't already seen his name lighting up my wife's screen. Ethan. For a few seconds I just stood there on the sidewalk, looking through that glass like my body hadn't caught up to what my eyes were doing. Then I saw her smile. Not the polite one she gave me across dinner tables. Not the thin social version she used with friends. This was soft. Warm. Interested. The same expression I had spent months trying to earn back with patience, effort, restraint, anything that might remind her I was still her husband. He said something. She laughed and reached across the table, touching the back of his hand for just a second. That was the reveal. Not because it was the most dramatic thing I could have seen. Because it made the whole timeline click into place all at once. The birthday insult. The phone habits. The late calls. The way she treated me like a chore and then came alive through a screen. She had not been lost. She had not been overwhelmed into emotional absence. She had simply moved that part of herself somewhere else while I stood in the same house trying not to ask too much. I should have left then. Instead, I watched another minute, maybe 2. Long enough to see him lean in. Long enough to see her not move away. Long enough to watch her tilt her head and smile like she had already stepped out of one life and into another without bothering to tell the man still paying the mortgage with her. Then I walked in. Neither of them saw me at first. I crossed half the room before Lauren looked up. The change in her face was immediate and brutal. Her whole body went still. Not guilty at first. Caught. Like she had never actually pictured this part happening. Like I was supposed to state theoretical. A husband at home. A man in the background. Not a real person standing 3 feet from the table where she had been redistributing the affection she told me no longer existed. Ethan turned next. Confused first, then alert. I asked him if he knew she was married. Lauren said my name like a warning, but I didn't look at her yet. Ethan hesitated. That told me enough before he even spoke. Then he said she told him things were complicated. Complicated. That lazy little word people use when they want to touch what belongs to someone else without admitting they're already dirty. I looked at Lauren then. I asked how long. She started crying immediately, which only made me angrier because tears were apparently available now. Not when I told her I missed my wife. Not when I sat across from her asking what she even wanted anymore. Not when she told me to disappear like that was a funny enough way to describe her husband. No, tears showed up once the truth had witnesses. I asked again. This time she said a few months. Then, when I kept looking at her, she corrected herself. Closer to 5. 5 months. That number hit me hard because it rearranged everything behind it. 5 months meant the coldness had not been random. The dead bedroom had not been stress. The birthday line had not been a bad joke. She had already been emotionally elsewhere long enough that contempt had started leaking out in public. I asked if that was why she said what she said about my disappearing. She looked down at the table. Didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because the truth was sitting right there between us. She had not said it as a joke. She had said it as the nearest version of honesty she was willing to risk while still counting on me to stay put. Ethan stood up at that point, said he didn't want to be in the middle of this, which was almost funny considering where he'd chosen to sit. He left cash on the table and walked out without looking at either of us again. That left the two of us standing there in a bar full of low music and strangers pretending not to notice. Lauren tried to explain. Said it started with work overlap on a renovation project. Said he listened. Said she had felt disconnected from me for a long time. Said things between us had been off and she didn't know how to fix them. All the usual lines people use when they want the affair to sound like weather instead of decisions. Then she said the part that mattered most. She said she hadn't meant for me to find out like this, not I'm sorry I did it. Not you didn't deserve this. Just that she hadn't meant for me to find out like this. That was when the last piece dropped into place for me. I wasn't her partner in trouble. I was the backup structure. The husband still standing there managing the practical life while she tested whether the emotional one had a better option. I told her we were done. She followed me outside crying, asking if we could at least talk at home. I told her there was nothing left to clarify. She wanted me gone for her birthday. She got close enough to another man to mean it. That was all the explanation I needed. The aftermath was cleaner than the marriage had been. Lauren stayed with her sister that week. Then longer. There were lawyers, paperwork, the slow ugly logistics of dividing a life that had looked stable on paper long after it stopped being loving in practice. A few friends were surprised. A few clearly weren't, which told me even more than their sympathy did. Ethan vanished from the picture fast once things got real. Apparently he liked the version of her that came with soft lighting and secrecy more than the one that came with consequences. That didn't comfort me. It just made sense. Looking back now, the birthday comment didn't destroy my marriage. It exposed it. Because once your wife can say you disappear and the sentence sounds more true than cruel, the affair has already started somewhere, even if you don't know the man's name yet.